Okay. Well, say hi in the chat. That's really important. I say it in the beginning, and hopefully if people come in, they can say hi. And this is Webforms Greatest Hits, and the title is actually with an AMA, and I'll explain that in a second. My name is Jacob Rockowitz. I'm known as Jay Rockowitz on the web. I am a Drupal developer and software architect. I built and maintain the Webform module for Drupal 8. This is a different spin from my typical presentation. When COVID started out, DrupalCon happened. I had my presentation from last year, and it went okay, but I realized there's an opportunity here because we're online. I'm not standing in front of people, that I can do a different type of engagement. And this is different in the sense of I'm breaking the presentation down into 10 segments, and each segment has a theme, which is not typically my presentations do that. But at the end of each segment, I'm open to Q&A, and I really am open to Q&A throughout the whole thing, because I think that's our opportunity here with these online conferences. I've done this conference a few times, this presentation, sorry, a few times, and that my goal, you can get the information here. So if I miss a segment, doesn't really matter. You can find it. I do lots of videos online, but I'm here to answer your questions, and just ask them. I have no problem. If you came with a specific question, or even if you want to share right now, what level have you used the Webform module? I haven't used the Webform module. I'm going from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. Any context you can give me in the chat helps me know what to address. It makes a big difference. And really, this presentation is turning into choose your own adventure, where you decide how this is going to go. I can go very basic through everything, or I can go into very specific things. If you see something on the screen and it looks interesting, we'll do it. So Cindy says she hasn't used the Webform module much at all. So I'll definitely, and I'm going to focus for sure on the first 5 parts of the session. And I'll start in that direction, and then we can get into more advanced stuff. So it's just breaking down the patterns of how forms, submissions, configuration, elements, and handlers work. And then the second column is really some advanced things that questions people have asked me about. How does conditional logic work? How does spam work? Security, headless, and support. And there are bonus tracks. And look at this slide if you have experience with the Webform module, because these are topics you can ask me to talk about. I have slides about tokens. But if you're interested in learning more about select menus, I'll talk about it, or wizards, or access controls. Anything you want, especially demos, focus on you're building an event registration system, and I can walk you through it. So I'm going to start out with the form builder. And each section has like a song. I'm not pretty, but I'm powerful. And the form builder provides a simple UI for creating forms. It's accessible via keyboard and screen readers to all users. Now, this is important. This is the admin UI for building forms. And one of the reasons I like emphasizing this is it emphasizes that everything about the Webform module is accessible and works for people with disabilities, screen readers. There's no keyboard traps, which is something I don't think people totally are familiar with, but in complex UIs, you might go into an HTML editor and you can't get out of it. And that's been taken care of in the Webform module. And in my notes here, I like to emphasize the developer side of things, that developers can see the source behind a form and edit the raw code that's building a form. And I'm going to demo the form builder, and it's a clean install. And my kitchen sink demo it's kitchen sink, or like basic intro demo is, here's the contact form, and I want to add a company element. I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a company element. This is the form builder. There's even keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to call out little silly things to just throw out things there. And I'm going to add a text field. I'm going to call it company. Not going to go through every option. If you have some option you're curious to learn more, just ask about it. I'm going to save it. It's added. You can hit view. It's at the bottom of the form. There's a mistake here, which should say your company should be required and moved up over here. And you can absolutely do this in the form builder. You can drag it up. You could, under your name, hit required, hit save. What I like to do is switch over to the source mode. And this is the source code behind the form. For developers, this is Form API. It's a render array that represents a form. This is how content is sent to, like anything you see in a Drupal site looks like this underneath. It goes to the browser, and then it doesn't go to the browser like this. Drupal renders it and outputs HTML. But I'm going to company. I cut and paste it. I'm changing the label, the title, and I'm just showing you can cut and paste anything, so I'm going to make it required. This is really useful because a couple of benefits of this mode, and I think it's like important that people know it, is you can edit any label, which is huge. So if you have a long form, you can just tweak things. You can copy and paste blocks of elements from one form to another. And if you need support, you can cut and paste this into an issue on the Webform issue queue. And that helps me immensely. Now I'm going to go over to the test tab. And you can see it's moved over, it's required, and the test tab will fill out a form with dummy submissions automatically for you. And if I hit send, it's going to send one submission, boom, with our message. And that really, sorry, I want to fix one thing. Show toolbar. And now I can click the back button. And we've just created one submission. And we're going to talk about submissions in a second, but let's keep going. So some tips, use admin tiles to make it easier to manage your form and submission data. So you can have really long questions. Let's say, you're asking like, what was the history behind blah, blah, blah. And, they have 3 radios they have to check off. And you don't want that title, that long wordy title, to be displayed everywhere. You can add an admin title. And that's just a short description. So if you're asking a question, I don't know, what was your age at I'm tired as early. A long question. You can do an abbreviated title of it where it's just kind of, 1 word or 2 word title. And developers should know how to use that YAML source mode. It's really important for developers. You'll get the most out of it. But that source mode is accessed by a permission. So non-trusted users that you don't know, don't let them edit the source because you can do a lot of damage. You could wipe out a whole form. You can manipulate a lot of things with a form, not worth doing. I don't think there's going to be a lot of questions. What I like to do is add my own little questions to this and say, well, first off, I want to show you admin titles because there's another feature that was recently added. So we added this company, and I click edit, and I go over to advanced because think about admin titles advanced. At the bottom, it says administration. So instead of your company, because you could just say company, and this will go into any spreadsheets that are generated. And you could say, this is a note about my company. This is the admin note is incredibly useful for complex forms. I had an element with a lot of custom logic, like special tokens, and I put a little note that said, don't edit this, leave it alone. And I recommend doing that and experiment. And this note is only visible here. I'm going to keep going. So we created this form and we got a submission. So we hit submit and there's a record. And that's all about showing me the data. And when you're doing submission management, you get to a results table and the columns can be customized. Reviewers, each individual person who's reviewing results can customize their results. So everyone can have their own display. So if you have marketing, people looking at a form, or an administrator or an event organizer, they each can decide what data they need to look at. Submissions can be flagged or locked, so you can add a little, you can tweak them a little, and you can export that data into a CSV. And ultimately, for developers, this results table can be replaced with a view. So I'm going to go over to the results table. What I'm actually going to do is show you another cool trick with the test tab. So we could fill this out once, but for this demo, I want to do 50 records. So if I have the develop generate module on, I can hit generate and it'll generate 50 submissions, and this will redirect to the results page. So now we got some real data here so we could look at it. And you can go in and customize this. So this is showing everything, which can get really long for forms with 100 inputs. It could be a little overwhelming. So you can go in here and decide what columns. And usually what I do is, that's why I'm bolding, ready? This is the data coming in. This is all we're really going to want to see in operation. So I have the ID, the data, the operations. You can say how it's sorted. Maybe you want to sort it by something else, but date's probably fine. Use the default. By the way, all these tooltips help explain each little thing. I'm not going to go through everything. This checkbox allows each user to customize their results table. So I'm doing it now. I'm not checking it off. It's going to reset. This is the table that every user will see when they get to these results for this form and this instance of this form. And if I, as another user, customize it, it will affect everyone. And that's kind of why there's that checkbox there. Now I'm here. Oh, something I didn't do, which I like, I want to just emphasize a lot of cool features. So, well, let me hit reset. So we get back to a place where I can show you. You can star. That means basically little, make it sticky, make it stand out. And you can use this drop-down menu to find starred ones. If you have an application process, these might be people you're accepting. Locking just prevents users from updating a submission. It locks it, and only admins can do it. And it's a good behavior, kind of trying to add some workflow to the Webform module. And in many cases, this is enough. And you can finally add admin notes. Yes, you can edit a submission. I don't think people are not surprised. You can view it. The edit just shows you the same form. I think I really like this feature to point it out is you can download it as a PDF. And I had one demo where it didn't work, but I've gotten this pretty reliably working because I'm using the entity print module provided by the Drupal community. And it takes a submission and converts it to a PDF. Let's see that it works. It did. Very simple, but here's the thing. You have full control over this. You can create a rich PDF document from a submission, and you can even attach that to an email to a patient or to someone who's, I'm sorry, I said patient, it's like I work in healthcare. So to the person filling out the form, you can send them a PDF confirmation or someone who you're sending a notification to. This is an incredibly powerful feature because it gives you like a canonical record for your submission. And I'll get into that a little bit more. Well, one thing I also finally here is you can download these results, and that's where it gets into. So you've reviewed it. You're like, okay, this is fine. I want to download it. In the download tab, for this purpose, I'm going to do an HTML table, which can be opened in Excel, which is why this exists. You can open this table in Excel. You can control every aspect of this table, how the columns are set up, whether you're showing the title of the elements or the key. The example is sometimes the keys are more useful because those align with your database. You can pick and choose which columns are displayed. And if I uncheck this, you're going to see this giant HTML table on screen. And that opens up in Excel, and you can work in the data in Excel and archive it. There's also some other formats, and I'm going to just walk through them because I think this helps people, is the CSV download is a pristine CSV that you can actually take from one system and upload to another. That's the upload tab over here. I can show it to you for a second. There's this dedicated module. It's the Webform Submission Import module, and allows you to import submissions, and it will figure out and map and merge data. This is a good migration pattern. In a lot of cases, people will rebuild a form from scratch, and they'll then just export their data and bring it in. If you're from a whole different system, you could at least rebuild the form from scratch, but then get your data in. This is where you can generate a CSV total control over. It's meant to just be in any system. And this one I love is the PDF documents. So I showed you that single PDF of submission. This will generate PDFs of all your submissions. It will batch process through 100,000 submissions and create a zip that you can store anywhere. And it gives you a perfect archive. And if I was archiving a form, I would use a combination of a spreadsheet and the PDFs. And the PDFs are tagged by ID, so you can always go back to them. That is a lot more information than I typically give. Now, I can't go into views because it's complex, but the idea is you can replace what I just showed you with the views module, and you have to use the Webform views module, views integration module, or there's the Webform submission views token field. It is a much lighter weight solution, and what it does is it just allows you to pull data from any submission into a view, but you can't really do filtering and sorting by it, but sometimes that's just enough you need to do. It is very simple. And the Webform query module is really goes into, people ask, why aren't you using Field API? Well, the background here is the Webform module is storing data slightly differently than how you would store a node. It's not using Drupal's Field API because it's a different type of data. One, we're collecting a lot of data and a lot of fields. If you have 100 web forms on your site, foreseeably you could have thousands of fields or elements. And so that data is being stored in something called an entity attribute value model. It's a one table to capture all the data. So it makes querying it a little tricky. So coming back to this module, the Webform query module provides an API to query your submission data. It makes it a little easier. Keep in mind, the table is not that complex, and developers can write queries off of it pretty easily. I'm not going to pause much for questions. You should just ask them. And I forgot to emphasize, if you have a question, just put a capital Q and I'll answer it while I'm talking. Configuration and settings, everything and anything can change. That's the song here. And the typical things, you can change the labels of everything that's happening, behaviors. You can it's important to emphasize, you can disable elements, handlers, and almost any feature, even external libraries. And if you install third-party modules, like for example, spam protections third-party, you can configure those too. I'm going to pause because Bernardo asked a question and I want to see if I can address it a little bit. Any insights in regards to Webform integration with Workbench? Let me get to the end of this. I'm going to make a note of it and come back to that. And it's a little tricky with workflow, but it's fine. So, configurations and settings. The demo is fairly simple in the sense of, the reason I say configuration and settings is there's a pattern here. Configuration are global settings that apply to all web forms, and settings apply to an individual web form. I think it helps to go back to our contact form and just look at the settings on this form and just be like, I go over to the settings tab and you're going to see some typical stuff. The title, the admin, there's tons of features and everyone has a description. And I'm going to get into some of these. You can tweak the URL. You can enable Ajax. I recommend, this is third-party settings. Even the entity print. This is where you could set a custom header and footer that I showed you. You need to just walk through all these settings and get familiar with them. The form, and it's broken down from general to specific. Think about it this way: general settings around form, the URL and title, the form. How does the form work? Then how do submissions work? And then when someone hits submit, confirmation and handlers. Confirmation's the page that's displayed. Handlers I'll get into, but that's what happens in the background. And then you can add custom CSS and JavaScript. But going to forms, you can set behaviors. You can disable little nuances to a form, whether you like. You can disable client-side validation or inline. You can go and set up pre-population. You could set up access denied. We just did this thing. I want to show something on submissions. I like showing new features because if someone's here and they've used it, it hints at something and they're like, oh, that is really cool. So we finally fixed tokens where you can check off these boxes and allow users not logged into Drupal to view, update, and delete submissions using a secure token. So this can address, like, you could create a subscribe form, and that was why someone asked for the delete. Is the idea someone fills out a form, they subscribe, but in the email, you give them, you say, at any time that you want to unsubscribe, here's a URL. Click here, and they go, and boom, they're unsubscribed. Their record is deleted. It's a really great approach, and I think people are going to start using this even more. And we just moved all these settings into one block to make it easier. To go to configuration, so I'm going to jump up, I click on Web Forms, and there's a tab called Configuration. And it follows the same patterns I've just talked through. Forms, general to specific. Now, these are all the defaults of everything that I showed you. You can tweak how they're going to work. And this expand all just lets you kind of see, what's the default. For example, if you don't like the word form and you want web form, you could change that. What I want to get into is there are some global settings that that you want to think about. The biggest one, I think, and I'm going to collapse so that I can get to what's really important here, is element types. This allows you to disable elements. So if you don't need users attaching files or uploading files, turn it off. And if we scroll down, we're going to see the password element is supported but not recommended. And there's even a behavior here. If I check it off, it's going to warn you. And the problem is that passwords are stored as plain text. If you have encryption turned on or you're pushing the data to a third party, it makes sense. It did not make sense to recommend people to enter passwords or to make them available to all users. The same thing applies to handlers. You can turn on off handlers. You could, if you don't want emails being sent out from your system, you can turn it on, turn it off, or you don't want this default email handler. Tons of things can be, every single plugin can be disabled. That is a pattern. So exporters, what I just showed you with the PDF generation, if you said, I don't want PDFs, I don't want users to generate PDFs, you can turn it off. You can say, I don't want them to download every document as a PDF. That is intense on your server. Libraries, the Webform module, and this is like for people new, relies on a lot of external libraries. Like here's a massive list. and it manages them pretty well. And there's documentation here and on Drupal.org how to use those libraries. In some cases, you might not want certain libraries to be available. And if you uncheck it, it won't be installed. And it will just use progressive enhancement and remove the library and default to kind of like, for example, if you uncheck the code mirror, you won't get the rich code editor, you'll just get a text area, which is fine. In some sites, they might want to do that. Or if you're using the ACE editor, some other alternative across your site, you might want to uncheck this and apply the alternative site-wide. Finally, in advance, and I'm going to, please post questions while I'm talking because I will come back to them. Instead of that, I'm going to ask for more questions, but I want to show a new advanced feature because this became like a debatable topic is web forms, we're under structure. And that is a little weird because sometimes web forms are content. You have general people on your site creating forms, but they have to go to this different tab and they don't go to the content tab. And it's very difficult because the content section of the site has a limited amount of space because it doesn't allow for this complex of a UI. So the decision was to make this option where you could display web forms as a top-level administrative menu item in the toolbar. And I'm going to check it off. And actually, one of the reasons I show this is it makes it easier for me to proceed with this demo. It rebuilds the toolbar, that's the black bar up here, and moves the web form module into its own dedicated menu. And give it a second because it's rebuilding. And here we go with web forms up here. So for a site with general editors, what they're going to get is content and web forms. And they won't see all this other stuff because this is all permission-based for administrators. And they can quickly get to any aspect of the web form module, and it makes it works really well for sites with a lot of forms, with a lot of form builder, people building forms. I'm going to do some tips. Keep it simple. I just showed you an overwhelming amount of information, and I have this quote of like the web form module ships with reasonable default values, but everything's customizable. So you don't have to tweak things. Like just use it as is and use the default settings. But I will say disable unneeded functionality. I think that's worth like what I spent the time showing you is really important. Look at those and just decide what you want available. And this is it for developers is you can use, so web forms and submissions are entities, and they can have hooks. And just to clarify, web forms are config entities, and submissions are content entities. And you can use Drupal's hook system to change if someone goes to create a web form. You can set default settings. You can kind of tweak that. I have a lot of people doing stuff where anytime someone creates a web form, it automatically sets up an email to be sent out to an internal person in the system. Like it just sets up the default email handler. And it kind of makes sense if you know your users, and this is what has to happen in all forms. Anyway, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to get to the workbench question toward the end, and I'm looking at the time, so we're fine. Elements. I spent some time just showing you elements and saying there's a lot. And there's a web form examples module, which gives you like a style guide, which is a kitchen sink of every element available. Turn this on and look at it. See what's going on, understands what's possible, and go, do I need cute kittens? I don't need this. I'm going to turn it off. Do I need ratings? Signature? We're getting into Likerts. I need a sip of water. What's great is this is auto playing, so. We're seeing composites, and I'll spend a minute on that. This is for designers to see how every element will lay out. How does it work? What are the dividers? What are the status messages? Yeah, this is a tool for developers to understand what's possible and for your designers to know what it's going to look like. And this is a web form. You can go in and customize it. I recommend doing that for your site if you have specific requirements. And this is zooming in. I think I showed you a lot with elements and their settings. This is zooming in on every single label possible for an element. And some of these are expected. You can have a title for an input. You can have a tooltip. You can have this placeholder text inside. You can have a simple piece of text, which is the description, or you can have a more slide out. I don't recommend doing this on your forms. You need to pick one or the other depending on the use case. The use case for tooltips, which I use heavily in the web form module, is I don't need this data visible on every, like you keep coming back to the same form. So I don't want to show the same description over again. It's not really necessary. If someone needs help, they roll over the tooltip. More is really great for forms where the description is not a simple string of text. I have definitions sometimes. I work in healthcare, and we need to describe what a PSA is, the prostate antigen. Oh my God, see, prostate antigen something, and I don't even remember the full title. And we have learn more about PSA, and they click on it and slides out with a paragraph with links in line, and they can get more information. So these are just cool elements. This is a computed Twig element. It is doing calculations on the fly in the back end using Twig. And this is using tokens where it just grabs the data. And we'll get into it when it jumps in the back. So I'm just adding two numbers together, and we use a computed Twig. And if you scroll down, you're going to see it's just a very simple Twig statement to do some math, and it's going to have it enabled to do Ajax, because calculations can also happen in the background. The token is just where I've selected a user entity, and now I can grab metadata, like data from that user entity, and insert it into the site. All right. So composite elements are multiple elements working together. So it's like an address, or this is in case we're collecting user profiles. And you can create your own in code. You can create a custom one. There's some out of the box that make a lot of sense. For example, there's address, name, contact, and link. Link would just be title and URL, but you can collect that information from a user. Yeah, and this is a really dedicated module to build custom options elements. So this is showing you, it's kind of like Web Components where I'm setting up HTML and CSS. So I'm defining like how my element's going to work. I can even define some default options, and then I'm going to go to the preview tab. And what this is doing is generating buttons. Now you can take this a step further and take an SVG, which is markup, set the URL of the SVG, and set the ID and name attributes. So those are kind of they saw us with the option value and text, and create a clickable map of the United States that you can even pan and zoom. And while it keeps going, I want to emphasize one of the benefits of doing this is the Webform module layering on accessibility. And the accessibility here is it does keyboard shortcuts, it does announcements, it has the tooltips, and it makes it makes it a little easier to keep things organized. So some tips and tricks. Every aspect of a Webform element is customizable. Start out with basic elements. So I showed you that really cool feature with computed elements with Ajax. Use it sparingly. It does a full build, a full render on the back end. So if you have nested Ajax requests or dependencies on those, it can slow down your site. And for developers, if you put your elements in code, it gives you the most flexibility and stability, because if it's in code, it goes into revision, it goes into like Git, and you can do little nuanced tweaks that you just can't do in the UI. I'm going to take a break here. We're fine. We got 22 minutes left for questions. I'm going to do, so any tips for web form configuration management? There's an array of options, but I wonder if one should be preferred when dealing with multiple environments. That is a great question and so I'm showing you a lot of stuff. So when I said web forms are config entities, that means they're exportable. And one of the deliberate things I did with web forms in terms of configuration management is I made them easy to export. I also it makes my life easier to debug. So if I go over to the form, like the contact form that we just worked on, the link to the slides is in the beginning of the chat. And I go over to this form, and there's a bug. This is, by the way, we're on a call. I want to be like, ready. If there's a bug, this is what I want you to do. Create the form that replicates the bug, hit export, and here's the configuration of everything that's going on with this web form, with the elements nice and tidy, because they are stored in a string, but it tidies them. And you can download it to your machine and upload it to the web form issue queue. Now with options, the same thing is applicable, and we'll talk about options because I think it's good. This is like stuff that I don't normally talk about, but it's kind of, so the idea is you can have a drop-down menu. And I'm not going to go into building a drop-down menu. People know what they are. It's a select menu that you can open and close, and you have options for those. When you're building one, you can manually enter the options for that specific element, or you can set up global lists of options. And when you see this, you're going, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The Webform module has a ton of defaults, so days of the week, months, time zones. And then you can, when you're creating a select menu, say use these options. I recommend doing this. If you're using options across multiple forms, it helps a lot. Like even for a client, I literally just created my own gender one because they had some specific requirements, and I'll even use it. I want to emphasize what it's also doing. It's like the example I had to do for a client was they wanted the value to be male, but the text to be, lowercase male, the text to be uppercase male. And this is exportable, each one of these sets of options. That's also easy. Configuration like this is very easy to move from environment to environment. If you search for web form configuration, there's a dedicated blog post about managing web form configuration, and it makes it a lot easier to deal with your multiple environments. It's using tools in the Drupal community, config split, config ignore. And that's, that was totally worth spending some time on. I mean, the only other cool option, so I showed you the cute kittens, and I want to emphasize that's also, you can create sets of images. So those cute kittens are being driven from here. I'm not manually entering them in every time. And people are doing this feature was created by a team of developers working in the Amish community to build barns, and they needed pictures of all the barn doors on their form, and they needed them to be reusable. So this is what we built out. Like originally you had to enter each individual image, and they sponsored the feature of let's get all the images in one place and have them organized. And this does track where it's being used. I think actually my example, I was manually entering them because it's not saying used by. I will come back to the workflow question, I promise. I think it's a good topic because really tied to workflow, it's handlers. And every action should have a reaction. And with workflow, that's a reaction. At first, you got to have a form and someone submit the data. And these are the out-of-the-box handlers. So email, I think people totally understand. Scheduled email is a really nice extension of the email handler and allows you to schedule an email to be sent out. If you're building an event registration system, which there's a demo of in the Webform module, it makes a lot of sense to send a reminder to the event one day before the event. And that's all the scheduled email handler does. And there's going to be a little demo of it. Remote posts I'm going to get into, and I'm not going to miss that. That's just being able to push data to another server. Now, when we come to workflow and settings, actions and settings do provide an opportunity to start doing some workflow stuff. And I know Workbench is a little bit different one, but when I hear the word Workbench, I think it's about moderation. Yeah, it's moderation and workflow, like controlling the flow of a submission and how it's being reviewed. And you can post more questions if I'm not addressing your specific question. Actions and settings basically allow you to trigger things to happen. So an action triggers on a submission. If someone enters a certain value, you could flag that submission. You can even lock it. You could add notes to it. Settings changes how a web form is going to behave. The perfect example of that is someone enters a certain value and you want to change the confirmation message. You can use the settings handler to say, well, conditionally, if someone enters, I don't know, if you have a feedback form and they say this is an emergency, they check off a box, this is an emergency, you can add text to the confirmation page that says this is an emergency, display a custom message on it. Both of these, they're basically rules. They're little ways of doing rules onto your web form and your submission at the same time. And debug just shows you data. And I'm going to just show you the scheduled email handler. I think what's important is, I'm not going to walk through every detail of it, but it extends the email handler. This is important for developers to think about. So all I'm doing is, this is the email handler with this scheduled email details at the top, and it's allowing you to schedule when the email is going out. And this is just the simple email handler. I'm going to keep going. Enable debugging. So when I write handlers, every single on the advanced tab has a debug, and that'll show you the data. And if there's an error, it'll show you what happened. And so handlers are plugins that can act on forms and entities. It's like hooks. Well, plugins are kind of a replacement to hooks. So you can hook into the form validation submission, and since it's entities, you can react to when a web form submission is saved. I recommend using the entity hooks in a handler over validate and submit unless you have to, because if you're doing any API requests, like if you're creating a submission and you need to remote post that submission to a third party, you want to do it in an entity save, because then that means if someone does it command line or API, it doesn't matter. All handlers support conditional logic, so you can conditionally send out emails depending on what someone enters. And they're extendable. This is a great thing about Drupal. So with workflow, I'll talk about it for a second, is like there's the add-on section, and it's really one of the best ways I can add. That's why I created this tab. This is a list of all the modules that extend the Webform model. They are add-ons. And if I type workflow, and by the way, if I collapse this, I'm pretty sure we're going to get to workflow. And I'm trying to keep track of what people are doing in the community. Workbench specifically, I do not know of an integration for in the Webform module for Drupal 8. But Maestro's workflow engine, it's incredible. It does flowcharts around that is a rich system to do read it, automated a sequence of tasks, business logic, collaboration process. It's amazing. The workflows field allows the web form submission to integrate with Drupal's workflows and moderation. So it basically adds a field to submissions. I haven't done a lot of stuff with workflow because I also do a very low fidelity thing. We're not getting into it, but there's access controls to everything. So you can add not hidden, but elements to a web form that are for administrators only. So someone fills out the form and you could create a review process where they fill it out and then the reviewers come in and they get to see questions at the bottom of the form that they could tweak and say, approve it. You can even do a review process of attaching reviews. There's an application evaluation system, a demo provided by the Webform module. And you have an application, it comes in, and below the application when people review it is another form, which is an evaluation. And that starts a workflow where people are reviewing the application. Okay, if there's any more questions about that, ask it. James asks, seems like Webform is fieldable entities with event hooks in the UI. Can Webforms populate content? Yes, that's a great question. Can you use Webforms to populate content entities? And I had dreams of building this module and I never had the time, but if I do content, I expand the Webform content creator module. So this will create nodes from submission values as it's coming in. I strongly recommend it. It makes a huge difference. And the use case for this, I think, makes a lot of sense to me, is I could have a form with 100 elements or 200 elements, and really I only need some of those elements to be associated with the node. You can use the content creator, take some of those values, and that gets over some of the performance issue. Or you can pump multiple web forms into one node type, one content type. So you can have different events, and you can have them all kind of feed into one place. What's also helpful is there's code here that you can write your own custom integration. It's not hard to take the data, which is very flat and simple from a web form, and create a node or a user. There are examples of people creating user. That makes a lot of sense. Event registration, you want to create a user profile. And there's a module for that too. Oh yeah, there's a module for that. I had to say that at some point. Okay. I want to emphasize, I'm going to keep answering questions because we're going into the second part where this is just extra helpful information where I have videos about it. And I am not going to address in the next 5 segments. I'm going to address it now. So the next question is there a way to add a permission to set to web forms? For example, math department have CRUD access to their forms, but not other departments. This is kind of one of the bonus tracks that I haven't spent a lot of time on, but it's worth it. And also, I don't think there's a recording of it. So there's 3 levels of access controls. We all know permissions, or if you're new to Drupal, you don't, but I'll just quickly show them. I'm going to scroll down to web form permissions. Keep in mind, okay. Here we are, and I'm going to read the patterns. I'm not going to go through everyone. So this is admin access to web form configuration. There's notes about security to the overview page, because sometimes you don't want people to see all the web forms. They can access their own submissions. They administer web form element access. So that's a tab, and this is where it's answering the question. There's a tab where you can say who can access what element. And then it gets into basically a pattern of administer web form submissions, administer web form, and then you get into the CRUD operations of a web form. And think about this on permissions across all forms. So you can create web forms, delete any web form, delete any web form submission, delete own. This is a pattern for all entities in Drupal. I want to emphasize, this is where I hinted that you can add CSS and JavaScript. This is a permission. So you really don't want to do trusted roles, and a similar thing will go to that source mode. Let them only edit the source, only edit twig. I hope that explains permissions. Now, if you understand this, and it's common for Drupal, the CRUD permissions propagate down into, and by the way, I should just use this, your web forms. So let's look at the contact form. And I'll actually go into build. I'm going to add an element, and we'll call it admin notes. This is dedicated, and you might do this because you want to put description or help, please, or review notes. That's good. Someone could add review notes to it. And this is a very simple example, and you can use all the features here. And I'm even going to make it required. But what I am going to do is go into access, and you can control those CRUD permissions at this level and say, if I uncheck this, no one who's coming in when they create a form is going to be able to see that element. They're not going to be able to enter it. And then you could say, if you only want administrators to update, even to view it, which is kind of cool. You could, and by the way, you asked a question about roles. That's what this is about. These are the roles, and you could even pick certain users. You could even tie it to permissions. I think this is a helpful, I'm like giving you little bonus things. This checkbox is using something in Drupal render arrays called pound access. And this controls global access to an element. If you uncheck this box, the element is gone from your site. It is a trash bin. It is basically the only place you can see this element is in this admin UI, and everywhere else no one can see it. So you don't lose the data. That's really what it's about, is not losing the data. You're archiving it. But I'm not going to go there. I'm in here. I've set this element up. If I go to view, I think my demo is actually going to show you, see, that is missing here, that review notes. But then if I go here and go to results, you're going to see the column review notes. And if I click view, if we had notes, we'd see it. And if you click edit, now that the submissions come through, you have the review notes. I generally, with this type of pattern, I will do a details element at the bottom and slides open and close. So people kind of get a hint. I might even change the color of it. I forgot one minor thing. It's not a big deal. I dived all the way to the element, but the same thing I just described to you can be applied to web forms. So you, by default, web forms kind of make this assumption that the general permissions are applicable, and anonymous and authenticated users should be able to create submissions out of the box. You can control all of this. When I say this is deciding who can access the form, not even an element. And you can even say who can test the form, who can update their own, every single CRUD operation that you could imagine. That was a lot more information than you probably expected. I'm going to keep going. We got 7 minutes left. It's not a big deal. I'm going to skip over one thing, and it probably make it fine. Conditional logic is about asking the right questions at the right time. And conditional logic and variants allow you, tweak a form based on submission data. So you get data and you tweak how the form's going to work. Conditional logic is about hiding and showing and requiring elements. Variant is a really advanced concept that alters a form's labels and behaviors. So the example is, if you know a user's coming into a form, I work in healthcare, I have patients and caregivers. If I know a form's for a patient, I could change the labels to say, what is your diagnosis? Using a variant. And if I know it's a caregiver, I need to say, what is the patient's diagnosis? And the demo of conditional logic it's not hard to demo in the sense of, like, I might want to only ask company if someone, I don't know, enters a certain value. But if I click edit, there's conditional logic. So if someone enters name, so this element is only visible if someone has entered their name, if it's filled. That's how it works. This conditional logic can be applied to handlers as well. Same exact UI, experience. I'm going to keep going. Got 5 minutes. Start with conditional logic. It's Drupal's pound states APIs. You can use containers to apply conditional logic to a group of elements. So if I have 5 elements I need to hide with the same conditions, I put it in a div. It's called a container or details or a field set. And variants are tricky. And I'm not gonna do a whole demo of it, but variants, a web form variant is an alternate instance of a web form that adjusts settings, elements, and behaviors to yield a better result. So this is like personalization for web forms. And there's a pattern here where it makes it possible to do A/B testing, where you could, this example is just saying, well, what if I have a feedback form and I do everything inline and compact and keep it as compressed as possible with a select menu? What if I do it more verbose with radio buttons, with a progress bar, and vertically aligned elements? And this is A/B testing, and you could see which one is successful, and you could select, there's a apply where you can apply the success. By the way, the success rate is your metric system. Google Analytics is going to track the unique URL for those tests. Support unlimited variation. That's really, so I have a form where I need to change the phone number based on the organization filling out the form, and I've got 100 organizations. So I'm using variants. So company A comes in and they get a URL, company A's form, and I change the name and the phone number on the form. So that's like segmentation. It's targeting organizations. It's segmentation. And it's one form being reused across the board. And you can implement your own custom variant plugin. So for that case, I created a custom plugin that just says, give me the name of the organization and the phone number. Very simple, easy for someone to understand. And I even customized the list of variants to just show phone numbers. Spam protection, I am going to skip this. Stop sending me your junk. Honeypot, Antibot, and CAPTCHA. What I really want to emphasize is there's a recipe. And the issue is that spam protection can disable page caching, which is a performance hit. So if you're asking CAPTCHA, every single page has to ask a unique CAPTCHA question. Or if you have a time limit, every single page has to track it. The recipe that I kind of came up with is you want to use Honeypot, which is a hidden field to block robots, and Antibot. And Honeypot's a hidden field to block robots, and Antibot's JavaScript to block robots. And that combination usually protects against spam with no performance hit. CAPTCHA is very effective. If you get spam, I 100% recommend looking at CAPTCHA. I am going to do the last 2 minutes, and you can ask questions, and I will stay on till 10 o'clock. This is really important. I don't trust you. I don't trust anyone. So how do you secure your data? Well, you can encrypt submission data. There's a dedicated module. You can disable the saving of submissions. You can remote post this to a CRM. You could schedule. You can even, if you're storing submissions and moving it somewhere else or sending email, you can purge those submissions. That gets around a lot of compliance issues because they just don't want you holding on to data forever. And I showed you access controls. Users can control their own access. You can give them access to their data to delete it. They get a dedicated submission tab in their profile. But this is a really important recipe for people working with CRMs. So disabling remote posts, well, disabling results and posting it. So we have this form. I'm going to go purge the results, and I'm going to walk through the recipe. So the idea is we're sending out email, which is great. I'm going to clear these records. I don't want data stored in Drupal. Honestly, Drupal's meant to build websites. It's not always the perfect place to store data. CRM is generally a better place. So the first part of this recipe is I'm going to go in and say, don't ever store data in Drupal. Under settings, disable the savings of results. If I did not have email set up, I'd get a big warning because you'd be losing data. We're not losing data by not saving results. We've created a simple contact form here that just sends an email. And you can see the 2 emails, confirmation, notification. But what I want to do is while those emails go out, I want to remote post this to my CRM. And remote post takes the data, and I'm going to use the completed URL, the dummy here. And I'm going to, here we go. I'm going to paste in. This is my CRM. I made it up. You can pick the data. By default, makes sense to only send the data someone entered. And the last thing I want to show you, you can even do conditional logic, but debug, because this isn't going to work. That's fine, because I'm going to go to the test tab. I'm going to hit send. And it's going to fail. And the debug helps because you're going to see the error on screen and exactly what happened. it went to the URL, it sent this data, and I think I want to emphasize how simple the data is, easy to understand. It got a 404 error, it got the response, it's telling me what happened. And if you had a successful response with JSON data, it will parse it and give you tokens to work with. And it gives you a hint on what you can do with that. So if you get a confirmation number from that remote post, you can put it into Drupal, into as a token. Questions? Oh boy, I'm going to keep going. So I've got 9 people here. I'm going to keep going and show cool stuff. But if you have questions, ask them. I mean, by the way, if you thought variance A/B testing was cool, you need to see this. It's like, I'm going to spend 2 seconds on this. So how do you share your web forms? Well, there are tools like GraphQL, Gatsby, Drupal integration, JSON. This is a way of getting your web form data, like the presentation, out of Drupal and use something else to build a web form. You lose a lot of functionality with it. But there is this ability out of the box to share a web form. There's a Webform Share module, and what it does is it adds a share tab. And this is permission-based. You have to turn it on for each web form, but it allows you to get a JavaScript snippet that you can embed in any external website and embed your Drupal web form in that site, and it'll work seamlessly. It's a seamless iframe that resizes automatically. Yeah, and well, Michael's like, what? Well, this is the key one because you're a front-end person. And I'll just show it. That gray box has a dedicated theme to it. So you can control the look and feel of this embedded web form. So that's an iframe, totally independent, working outside of Drupal. I actually think I'm using the 7 theme, but in a lot of cases, I'd recommend like a Bootstrap theme. To write your own dedicated web form theme, yes, it's completely responsive. Mark's asking that question. Yeah, it's responsive because it's an iframe. And if you want to do it right, you want a dedicated Webform Share theme, because then you can, by the way, what's great is it's only about 5 CSS files to get control over your web form in the theme layer. And from there, you can make it very responsive. But yeah, it just follows the size of the iframe. It is seamless. It resizes automatically when you go to the confirmation. There's not much to it. That's what's kind of great. And I lost you guys on this side. I don't think do I even have it on in my demos? Let me see. Oh, I'm going to show it to you because I want people to know how easy it is. As a best practice, I am not turning this on automatically. You got to go to share settings and say enable sharing of this form. And we didn't get into web form nodes. You can say whether it's shared on web form nodes, display the title. Here's the theme. We could even say I want to use, I'll use Clara. And you could then add some custom attributes, hit save. I should just demo this feature instead of doing this screen because it's just so cool to click through. So you get your snippets here. These are the 3 options. Keep in mind the third party. And then if you do preview, boom, it's taking a second. Oh, there we go. Claro theme embedded module. Okay, James asked web form nodes, which is great. I think it's an important one. By the way, the test tab lets you really test that this integration is going to work. So web form nodes, I'm going to do it from the background of Drupal 7 is in Drupal 7, web forms were nodes. They were attached to nodes. So web forms weren't reusable. You could copy it over and over again. And I stepped back and said, well, let's make web forms their own thing. So web forms have their own URL, but then let's make it possible to attach a web form to any entity in Drupal. The most common entity is a node. And the idea is, and I can demo web form nodes. Let's see. I will use, to do the demo properly, let's use the event registration demo as the model. You have events that are nodes, and on each event, you want to have a registration form. So I click through to this event, and I have an ability to click on this. By the way, this is the advanced demo where I can open a modal dialog, and I get this web form. And this is a web form that's specifically capturing data to this event. I'll actually fill this out and show you what I mean by it. And if I hit register, on this node, and when I go back to the form, I get my own dedicated results tab, and it's capturing submissions to just this node. And that's a way, web form nodes provides a way to reuse your web forms across your entire site, organize them. And when you add a web form to a node, you get a test tab and a results tab and the share tab. So you can share this. If I hit share in this instance, you're getting a dedicated event registration form for this node, for this event that you could share across the web. If I go back to edit, oh, see, this is edit on, by the way, I'm on the node edit form. You got to get used to the pattern. You see, it's just a field. I'm saying event registration. Because it's embedded in a modal, I have to do this weird pattern to get back to the original form, but I kind of want to for demo purposes. I can go over in this, ready, if I go to build, now we're editing the event registration form across your entire site. And there's a references tab. This is all you turn on the Webform node module. There's a references tab that tracks all your instances of this web form across your site. This makes it really easy to be like, well, I need to add a new event. Well, I'll click add demo event, and it passes in the web form ID and takes the title of the form, and you can enter in your event information here. This also tracks a number of submissions, whether it's blocked. Okay, so I think I've talked a lot about this, and I'll go to James' next question. We have a web form content type for a one-to-one instance of a web form with an editable content by the content editor. Is it a good pattern? Any reason to use web form nodes? No, web form nodes doesn't address that one-to-one to a content. It's really a way to okay, I just want to finish the question. Is this a good pattern? Any reason to use web form nodes if the form will be visible from a single canonical page? No, web form nodes is about reusing. It's about creating it's called a source entity, like a reference, tying a web form to an entity on a site. So if you wanted a user to do a feedback form, you could put a web form onto the user page and track that user's feedback. It is fine to use it as a canonical page. There is some caveat there, ready? That canonical web form doesn't get all the web form node features. So you don't get, like, meta tags doesn't work out of the box for that web form, the single web form instance. When it's on a node, you have all those nodes stuff around it. Yeah, for one-to-one yeah. I mean, I do use web form nodes a lot. I build a web form and then I attach it to a node. It just makes it a little easier to move the web form around on the site too, because you can put it in books. You can get it. Yeah, it starts to appear in search a little easier. Yeah, I think that answers the question. You do want to play with the pattern. We have 3 minutes left. There are 9 people here. What's good is I don't have much more. There's community and support. There's documentation available. Use Drupal Stack Exchange for questions. The issue queue is 4 issues. And there's videos, and I didn't get to this tab, about every single web form feature. So when I said you could do views integration, there's a dedicated video about web form views integration. And you can get more information about that there. Yeah, report a bug, fix a feature, spread the word, tell your story, sponsor a feature. We're at the end. You can learn more about me at Rockowitz. And that was the bonus track on tokens. Are there any other questions? I mean, I see there's 9 people here. So if someone says, tell me more about something, I'll keep going. I don't care. I always plan it that way. Okay. We are done. Well, thank you. That was fun. Great way to start my weekend. I hope you guys have a great conference. And I don't know, enjoy Drupaling.